to our webinar on youth recruitment and engagement. Today we're going to talk a little bit about what motivates young people to actually participate in a media making opportunity and a youth engagement program, and also how do we tailor our approach in the delivery of our programs to really meet youth where they're at. So the first off point around recruitment is to think about the appeal that will actually motivate youth to join something and to sign up. And there are really two types of motivations, and there's lots of theories around this, the intrinsic motivation and the extrinsic motivation. So an extrinsic motivation might be that, through participating, you could earn mandatory volunteer community service hours, or maybe you could earn some money, or you could be eligible to win a scholarship, or you could earn points, and it's like a gamified thing, or maybe it's a badge, something that's externally validated. The other aspects of extrinsic motivation could actually include fear. Like if you don't participate in this, you could miss out on something. Or it could even be punishment. Now, we at Taking It Global don't take on approach that has a sort of fear-based motivation system, because we think that it's more appealing and more energizing to take motivation strategies that are a draw for like what we can gain and being drawn by the opportunity itself while recognizing the challenges. And we've definitely taken on strategies that utilize extrinsic motivation, the whole gamification again, and just really highlighting the benefits. Where we see highest levels of motivation though is when young people really see themselves with intrinsic motivation sort of rewards. So if we look at people like Dan Pink, he's actually done a whole talk, and we're sharing this resource with you in our webinar, in our online classroom. But he talks about intrinsic motivation and these three different areas that motivate people. So that sense of mastery, and in the context of media making, it might be that pathway to mastering a particular skill, whether it be through editing or storytelling in a particular way, and just developing mastery of certain skill sets as media makers. Autonomy is around the ability to really take that sense of ownership over an idea, something that you're really passionate about, and being able to have that pursuit. So creating space that promotes opportunities for autonomy and collaboration at the same time, and sort of being motivated by the people around you, but being really able to take that idea forward is also very motivating. And the third aspect of intrinsic motivation, highlighted by Dan Pink, is actually purpose. And we're all about creating with purpose. And so as we focus on the intention of that media piece and the purpose that it serves to the broader community, and why is it so important to get this message out there, and who are the people that we want to reach, like focusing on the broader purpose for the community and the impact it might have, can really attract that intrinsic motivation in youth. And so as you think about your different recruitment strategies, it's important to kind of recognize, are we drawing people in because of extrinsic rewards or intrinsic motivation? So moving beyond recruitment, I want to talk a little bit about the youth engagement spectrum. We did a mapping of youth-led and highly youth-engaged initiatives, and we conducted community consultations in large cities, in rural communities, and we talked about the challenges that young people face and what their hopes and aspirations are. And one thing that we mapped out are these 5 different levels of youth engagement and how we need to tailor the delivery of our programs to meet youth where they're at. So we start at how we would define the engaged young person. So we see that as someone who is aware of and somewhat involved in something they care about. So if you think about like organizing a food donation drive in a school, an engaged youth might hear about it, go home, collect some canned goods, maybe even ask some family members to contribute and to then donate and contribute to this drive. Or maybe it's a walkathon and they're contributing on that, or participating in an activity with some sense of pleasure, with some sense of enjoyment. So not like with a total like, oh, I don't really want to be here, but that sense of wanting to actually take part. We actually define engagement at Taking It Global as being inspired, informed, and involved. And so those 3 different parts. So it's not just the action, but it's that intention and that sense of learning while you're taking part. So then we move from being engaged to being highly engaged. And so what we look at here is if you have a group of youth that are highly engaged, they're likely already leading initiatives within their community. They are people who are the organizers, let's say, of the food drive, if we were to use that as an example. They're coming up with their own ideas, or they're taking concepts or toolkits or campaigns, and they're leading this, they're organizing this, and they're mobilizing larger groups of people to take part in activity. So then what starts to happen is we actually need to work with highly engaged youth to extend leadership opportunities to the engaged youth. So it's not just about their own development. Like when you're engaged, it's about finding opportunities to expand your leadership. Whereas when you're highly engaged, you're already leading a lot. And it's actually not just about organizing it all yourself, but it's about creating space for other leaders to emerge. Because otherwise, what we actually risk is over-engaged. And over-engaged would be youth who actually overcommit themselves. So many opportunities are coming their way, and they're saying yes pretty much to everything, but they can't in fact keep up. And so then what happens is a risk of burnout and a period of time of complete disengagement, because they can't take anymore, and they haven't learned how to build up that leadership potential in others. They've learned how to get things done, and they've learned how to sort of speak up, but they haven't learned to cultivate leadership among those around them, and actually have risk within their own health. So that's actually kind of a danger zone. So now I want to link back all the way to the other end of the spectrum. And this is where we're talking about disengaged youth. And when we think about disengaged youth, it's actually, in our view, those who lack awareness, or maybe they are aware to some extent, but they don't feel a connection, they don't feel that motivation to participate. So sometimes it's the whole, well, I don't know, and because I don't know, I don't care. So to don't know, don't care. And so one of the areas here that's really important is to create awareness opportunities that are experiential, for people to gain some sort of experience that does feel fun and that does have other benefits, like getting involved because a lot of other people are getting involved, or and maybe it is a little bit more extrinsic motivation just to kind of get them in and to have an experience that sort of is eye-opening and that motivates them to want to continue their journey and to be sort of engaged and active. And what we've also separated here is, because sometimes we think in these two categories of engaged and disengaged, and that's the whole point of this spectrum, is for us to think about that it is a spectrum, it's not just this or that, because we think of under-engaged youth as youth who face systemic barriers to participation. This could be barriers such as living in poverty, issues such as racism, or other factors of being in a sort of marginalized kind of community or a certain circumstance where we need to address, for example, can they afford transit to be able to attend this after-school program, or do they need to be home to take care of a family member, or do they need to be somewhere at work in a job where it's not really cultivating their full skills or full potential, but that's just where they need to be. And so other opportunities need to be provided to help those youth overcome those barriers. So it's not that they're not aware of the issues or that they don't want to be involved, it's that they don't have the means. And so we need to look at those systemic barriers and to address those in order to include youth in the process. And so as we think about the design of our programs, it's important to reflect on the roles of youth and how we're welcoming to youth in terms of where they're at, and also to recognize that there's movement. So it's not that you're in one sort of area and you're just there like all the time, that there's movement between these different areas, and to kind of keep open dialogue around it and to tailor the delivery of our approach so that it's not just a one size fits all, but we're really understanding the sort of the unique context of the youth that we're working with.
My name is Jelani Felbert. I'm a City of Toronto Parks, Forestry, and Recreation staff. I've been a staff with the City of Toronto for about 9 years. I started in 2007, 2006, doing small little instructional programs, and then I did a youth drop-in, and that was when I started doing youth programming. Then I did both youth summer camps, youth leadership, and now I work with the Investing in Families initiative, and that deals with the whole family. But with my caseload, I deal with a lot of youth, so I kind of still have a youth centered or youth centric view of things.
Mm-hmm. That
Um,
that's great. It seems like you have a lot of experience working with youth programming and directly with youth. So I'm
mhm,
sure you
I
have a
do.
lot of advice and experience to share with us. Um,
Hopefully.
so what overall has been your experience with youth engagement?
I've experienced a lot of the great things in youth engagement. I've experienced a lot of what people would claim to be negative things of youth engagement. And overall, my experiences showed me why youth engagement is important. Um, the youth dynamic is the most vulnerable of all the dynamics. They're going from the large jump from childhood to young adulthood. And in that, there's a lot expected of them and not a whole lot of guidance for them to get there. And in certain scenarios, there's very little available to them for them to get there, other than what they get at school and at home. But the programming the city of Toronto that has done and the time and resources that they've dedicated is to make that step a little bit easier. And that's to me very, very important because that eliminates a lot of the potential negative path youth goers as opposed to the positive path youth goers that we can help get there. I would say that the benefits of youth engagement are, while they seem very simple, they're very, very meaningful and lasting. And that's just the ability to experience things outside of your regular comfort zone. A lot of times youth know what they like, and because they're not able to experience things outside of that, they never really get to fulfill or get a fuller perspective on life itself. Like you need to experience life in order to get a perspective on it. And if you only know what you know and what you like, you're not able to form a fully functioning opinion on it. So the youth engagement piece that we've been working on and been doing and I've been a part of has been able to allow for youth to go outside of that and do skiing or do just activities that they normally wouldn't be privy to.
And you mentioned a bit earlier that some people claim there are claims that there are negative sides of the youth
Yeah.
engagement experience. So what are those negative sides? What are the sides that people claim are negative?
For a lot of people, the youth are a very scary age group because they feel they are going through an emotion. As I said, they're going through a large emotional and physical growth. So there might be a youth who is like 6'2" and going through all these emotions of puberty and has no idea how to really maneuver them. So they could be very moody, and then that has people feel physically threatened as well as emotionally, mentally nervous about how to engage with youth. And some of the negatives that they view are youth getting into fights or youth not being very willing to come out to new activities or just the overall negative stereotypes that youth have had attached to them about them being loud, aggressive, unreliable. All those things are that people have viewed as the negative side of youth engagement.
Okay, and do you personally see that as a negative side?
The fact that all of those things,
Mm-hmm.
I don't. I see that as a drawback for anybody, really. It's just because of the way that the youth are. It's attached, affixed specifically to them.
Mm-hmm.
Adults and children all do the same things, but again, because of youth are who they are and what they are, they get viewed as a much more negative way. So I do think that those are things that we can work to help them, but I don't think that they're negative to the point where some people have had such an aversion to working with youth that they genuinely just prefer to not have them around. I don't think it ever goes that far.
Okay, and in your experience, what are some of the most challenging aspects related to youth engagement as well as recruiting youth to participate in programs?
Um, The most challenging for youth is getting them to show up, incentivizing them. That's one of the most challenging things because youth often, as I mentioned earlier, aren't willing to step outside their own comfort zone. They have to be pushed. And some cases they push back and they don't want to and they don't end up going. Um, there's also sometimes funding, availability of space, availability of resources, uh, funding, space, resources, youth willingness, uh, other staff willingness, like the people that you want to run the program. Sometimes you may not be able to get them to do that. If I had a very specific idea in mind to engage youth and I didn't have the right person for it, I wouldn't want to put a lackluster effort towards it. I'd want to make sure that the right person for the job was there. So there's a lot of different limitations.
Okay, and I know with our educators that work with youth programming, a big thing is that making sure that youth come back to the program on a continuous basis. So you said incentivizing them is a big challenge. So
Mm-hmm.
what are some of the best ways of incentivizing youth to participate?
Well, getting to know them and forming a relationship is one of the best ways of incentivizing youth because that forms a connection and a bond. And then in that, you are able to incentivize them with you, with your presence, with what you bring to the table. And in terms of like tangible things, food is always really high on the list. They're growing young men and women, and they need a lot to fill their tank. So food is very high. Volunteer hours, things that matter to them in terms of what's important for the stage of life that they're at. So they'll be able to tell you. Being able to share their opinion openly is something that's an incentive to them because they don't always feel or often feel like they're heard.
When it comes to recruiting youth for the programs, what are some of the best ways, or what in your experience have you done to recruit youth?
Outreach is very, very, very vital because sometimes youth stay in a cocoon and a bubble and they don't really know what's happening outside of that bubble. So if you're able to kind of just poke through and give them some information that might heighten their interests, they'll come to you. Word of mouth is also very good. Once you've had youth who've had positive experiences, they're much more willing to go out and tell other youth and try to bring them in so they can experience the same thing. There's also, I guess, the way you promote it in terms of if you can do more, like the city of Toronto is moving towards a more social media kind of platform so that we can speak to youth on their forum as opposed to just putting up flyers or just having flyers or whatever traditional means of outreach we've had before. That way we can attack on different fronts. So being able to adjust and adapt is very important.
Are there different ways to approach youth engagement depending on the group of youth that you're working with?
Oh, absolutely. I firmly believe that you shouldn't have any cookie cutter or set template for how you are planning on engaging youth because every group of youth, every set of youth is different. Every youth in general is a different person. So you can have an idea, but if you are attached to an idea and unwilling to adapt and change, then you are not going to be able to reach as many youth as you possibly can. So ideas need to have obviously some sort of structure. You're not just going to go out and run wild, but you need to have the ability to change what your preconceived notions are, what your plan is, because sometimes things change at the drop of a dime.
What advice can you give to our educators about youth engagement? Like, what are some of the best practices that you've experienced with youth engagement?
Some of the best practices I've experienced with youth engagement and some of the best advice I can give would be to involve youth in the decision-making process so that they feel as though they have the voice, because in that they're much more likely to say and feel ownership over what has happened. So if you're engaging them for a specific activity and they had a say in how the activity was run, they'll be more inclined to participate in future activities. If there is the ability to sometimes, I don't know, go a little bit above and beyond and do something that's really memorable, I know sometimes budgets don't always allow for this, but sometimes if you have a major large event and you can go a little bit overboard, so it's a memorable thing that happens for years to come, or that has happened in their minds for years to come. Um, if you can slowly push them out of their comfort zone, so if you were to give them options and provide them something they're comfortable with, along with something new, so that way it's not a just they have to be dumped in cold water kind of thing. It's easing them into it. Those are some of the best practices I've seen so far for youth in terms of getting them engaged and getting them excited about things.
Okay, and as someone who works with youth, I know that a lot of our educators sometimes feel very despondent when it comes to youth not being engaged with their programs. What advice would you give to those educators to try not to feel down about youth not necessarily being actively engaged in the programs?
To, I guess, keep perspective, because as as much as I dislike saying it, you're not going to sway every youth. That isn't. That's like saying you'll be able to change everyone's mind. You'll get everyone to be on your side or get everyone to like you. That's not going to happen. Youth are just young people, and in that they have their own opinions, and they may not always want to do what you've had in mind for them, what you've had planned out for them. And to keep perspective and not let those moments of youth, maybe disliking something you've done, being disinterested in something you've done, not allowing that to get you down about doing future events and activities. Because there might have been a couple of youth that took a lot from it. And if you just toss the baby out with the bathwater, then you won't be able to learn from it.
Are there any don'ts when it comes to youth engagement? Things that educators really should not do?
I think one of my number one don'ts for youth engagement is to not promise something and then not deliver. Sorry, to promise something and not deliver.
Mm-hmm.
So if I were to have an event and say that it's going to have this person show up and then have this person show up and you guys are going to be able to do all of these things and then we'll feed you and then none of those things happen, that credibility and that trust is immediately fractured. It may not be lost, but it's a lot more difficult to come back from that fractured credibility than it is to just move forward and get youth to come out to things in general. If you have to get youth to come out to things, that's hard enough, but to have them be skeptical and distrustful, that's putting extra weight that nobody needs. So I would say that's definitely a don't. Another don't is to avoid just making sure that youth, like, if you want to make sure the youth are engaged and they have a say in things, awesome, but don't let them run everything and don't let their negative opinions adversely affect or shut down anything you're trying to do, because sometimes people will try to overcompensate and let youth do too much.
Okay, and are there any specific do's that you would encourage educators to do?
Be open, be willing. I would say something very important that one of my old supervisors told me is, do not ask youth to do anything you won't be willing to do yourself. So if it's something that you're trying to do to engage youth, you need to be able to say that you would be willing to do it on your own as well. And that gives it a more humanizing effect for yourself, as well as a more intriguing and welcoming aspect to the activity.
Any final thoughts, words of wisdom from your experience?
I would say just try to find something. One of my colleagues has said that if you find something that youth are passionate about, it gives them something to focus in on instead of getting distracted by all the negative things that can happen in life. And so just give them a passion, a focus, something that they can really get their attention and get their weight behind. And that will avoid a lot of the youth issues that they may ever face in life.
Okay, that's wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences and your insights with us. I'm sure our educators will really appreciate that.
Thank you. I'm happy to do it.